My brother sent me a list of 5 demands I had to obey before I was allowed to attend his luxury wedding. Complete them, and maybe you will be worthy of standing beside us, he wrote. I laughed, booked a first-class flight to Bali, and sent one final wedding gift. When he opened that black box in front of his billionaire father-in-law, his face went completely white. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use your own success to dismantle the lies of the people who look down on you. My name is Nora. I am 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a top-tier financial firm in Chicago. My entire career is built on tracking dirty money, finding hidden assets, and exposing financial lies. I deal in cold, hard facts numbers that never lie, and paper trails that always lead to the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal I was about to uncover within my own family. It was a Tuesday morning when my personal life collapsed. I had just walked out of the downtown Chicago courthouse clutching my canceled engagement papers. My wedding was supposed to be 3 months away, but finding out your fiancé has been maintaining a secret, separate life for half a year tends to alter your plans rather quickly. I had caught him cheating, confronted him with the undeniable evidence, and finalized the paperwork to cut him out of my life completely. Standing on the cold concrete steps of the courthouse, I felt the sharp wind coming off Lake Michigan biting through my coat. I was emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and incredibly vulnerable. Like anyone navigating a sudden life-altering heartbreak, I wanted nothing more than to lean on my family for support. I desperately wanted a comforting voice telling me I had made the right choice and that everything would be okay. I took a cab back to my apartment wrapped in a heavy blanket of grief. As I unlocked my door and dropped my keys on the kitchen island, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I eagerly pulled it out, hoping to see a message from my parents checking in on me. They knew today was the day I finalized the split. Instead, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from my older brother, Blake. The subject line did not say "thinking of you" or "I am so sorry." The subject line read, "Rules for wedding attendance." Blake is 35 years old and the chief financial officer at a prominent real estate firm. He was also the undeniable golden child of our family. Growing up, my parents, Harrison and Caroline, praised his every mediocre achievement, while completely ignoring my academic and professional milestones. Now, Blake was preparing to marry Jada. Jada is a brilliant and fiercely proud African-American heiress. Her father built a massive empire from the ground up and currently owns one of the largest real estate investment trusts in Illinois. Jada's family is the absolute epitome of generational wealth and excellence in the Chicago business community. They are deeply respected, and they value their pristine public image above almost everything else. My parents were absolutely desperate to impress them, willing to sacrifice anything or anyone to secure their place in this elite new circle. I opened the email expecting perhaps a dress code update or a schedule for the rehearsal dinner. What I read instead made the lingering sadness over my canceled engagement vanish, entirely replaced by a profound, icy shock. Blake's email did not offer a single word of sympathy for my broken relationship. Instead, he had drafted a formal bulleted list of 5 humiliating demands I was strictly required to fulfill if I wanted to earn a seat at his upcoming wedding. First, he demanded that I pay $25,000 toward their luxury honeymoon in Bora Bora. He explicitly stated this was my way to repay our parents for raising me. He claimed that since they were contributing heavily to the wedding, I needed to offset their financial burden. Second, I was instructed to wear an old plain gray dress he had specifically selected from a discount website. I was to sit at a designated table in the far back corner near the kitchen doors, so I would not visually clash with the aesthetic or embarrass Jada's elite family with my drab presence. Third, he imposed a strict gag order. There was to be absolutely no mention of my canceled engagement to anyone at the wedding. He wrote that Jada's family despised instability and that my failure of a relationship was considered contagious and embarrassing. I was to smile, nod, and pretend my life was perfectly fine while remaining entirely invisible to the important guests. Fourth, And this was the demand that made my forensic accountant brain snap to attention. I was to sign over my 50% share of our late grandfather's lake house to Blake as a wedding gift. The lake house was held in a dual signature trust between Blake and me, a beautiful sanctuary our grandfather wanted us to share equally. Blake insisted that as a married man, he needed the asset more than a single woman ever could. Finally, the fifth rule stated I was to leave the reception promptly before 8 in the evening. That was exactly when the VIP networking and formal professional photography with Jada's billionaire father and his high-profile colleagues would begin. I was literally being given a curfew, so my mere existence would not taint their carefully curated wealthy image. I stood in my quiet kitchen staring at the glowing screen of my phone. A normal person might have broken down in tears right then and there. A normal sister might have called her brother screaming or completely shattered under the heavy weight of such profound cruelty on an already devastating day. But I was not just a sister. I was a highly trained professional investigator of financial fraud. I read the long email a second time, and then a third, letting the harsh words truly sink in. The sudden demand for $25,000 in liquid cash combined with the aggressive push to immediately seize my half of a highly valuable real estate asset did not read like the arrogant requests of a wealthy, successful executive. They read exactly like the desperate flailing of a man drowning in massive hidden debt. The terrible grief I felt over my ex-fiancé evaporated into thin air, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Instead of crying, I walked straight over to my home office desk, booted up my secure laptop, and let my forensic instincts completely take over. I immediately picked up my phone and called my mother, Caroline, seeking an explanation for this absolute insanity. As the phone rang, my knuckles turned white from gripping the device so tightly. A small, naive part of me still hoped she would answer with warmth. I hoped she would tell me Blake was just acting out of pre-wedding stress, and that she would talk some sense into him. I hoped she would finally ask me how I was coping with my freshly canceled engagement and the sudden implosion of my own future. She answered on the fourth ring with a sharp, irritated sigh that immediately sucked all the remaining warmth out of the room. Nora. I am incredibly busy with the florist right now, she snapped before I could even say hello. What do you want? I kept my voice carefully controlled. Mom, Blake just sent me a list of demands for the wedding. He wants $25,000 for his honeymoon, and he wants me to sign over my entire half of Grandpa's lake house. He also told me to sit in the back in a cheap dress and leave before 8. Are you aware of this? There was a brief pause on the line, but it was not a pause of shock or maternal outrage. It was the sound of someone deeply inconvenienced by my existence. Nora Blake is marrying into a highly respected family, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Jada's father is a billionaire who rubs shoulders with senators and tech moguls. This wedding is the most important social event our family has ever been a part of. You are currently a single, canceled engagement mess. You bring bad energy and frankly a bad look to our family image right now. I stood frozen by the kitchen island, processing the sheer cruelty of her words. A canceled engagement mess. That was how my own mother summarized the most painful betrayal of my adult life. Just do what your brother asks, and do not make this about you for once. Caroline continued, oblivious to my silence. We need everything to be absolutely flawless for Jada's family. We cannot afford any distractions or any reminders of failure. Sign the house over like a good sister. Pay the honeymoon contribution to offset the massive costs of this wedding, and sit where you are told. It is one evening, Nora. Grow up and be a team player. Before I could utter a single syllable in response, she hung up the phone. The sharp beep of the disconnected call echoed in my quiet kitchen. There was no comfort. There were no questions about how I was doing. There was only the brutal confirmation that to my parents I was not a daughter. I was a social liability, a financial resource to be mined, and an unwanted blemish on their newly fabricated high society facade. I placed the phone face down on the marble countertop. For a moment, the silence in my apartment was deafening, the kind of silence that usually precedes a total emotional breakdown. But the breakdown never came. The sadness that had been weighing heavily on my chest all morning suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. It turned into cold, hard anger. The forensic accountant inside me fully awakened, stepping forward to take the wheel. I sat down on my velvet bar stool and opened my secure work laptop. The screen glowed to life, casting a harsh light across my face. Blake wanted my half of the lake house. Our grandfather had built that cabin with his own bare hands, specifically leaving it in a dual signature trust to ensure Blake and I would always have a shared sanctuary. I had spent every summer of my childhood on that wooden dock. The idea of just signing it away to fund a fleeting luxury vacation made me physically sick. But before I even entertained the thought of fighting him over the deed, I needed to know the exact current legal status of the property. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. I bypassed the standard public search engines and logged directly into the county property tax and deed registry portal using my professional credentials. I navigated through the digital archives, pulling up the official records for the Lakeview parcel. I needed to verify the chain of title and ensure the trust documents were still properly recorded. I expected to see a simple, clean deed listing both our names exactly as it had been for the past decade. That was when the first massive domino fell. The property portal loaded the most recent filings, and a glaring anomaly immediately jumped off the screen. My eyes locked onto a freshly registered lien recorded in the county database. The system showed a massive red flag hovering right over our grandfather's legacy. A $200,000 home equity line of credit had been officially taken out against the property. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I checked the timestamp on the filing. The loan origination date was marked just 3 days prior, 3 days ago. I froze, running the calculations through my head. A home equity line of credit of that magnitude on a property held in a dual signature trust requires the explicit, legally notarized signatures of both vested owners. There was absolutely no way around that strict legal requirement. The bank would never authorize the release of $200,000 against the property equity unless both Blake and I had stood before a certified notary, provided our government-issued identification, and signed the heavily regulated loan agreements. Except I had never signed a single document. I had not spoken to any bank. I had not visited a notary public. I had been completely consumed with packing my cheating ex-fiancé's belongings into cardboard boxes for the past 72 hours straight. My God, my blood ran cold. The lake house was held in a strictly binding dual signature trust between Blake and me. I had never authorized a loan against that property. I pulled my hands away from the keyboard for a fraction of a second, staring at the glowing monitor. A home equity line of credit required ironclad verification. I needed to see the actual paperwork. Using my corporate access to title networks, I bypassed the standard public summary and dug directly into the digitized county clerk repository. I requested the scanned PDF of the original loan application. The system spun for a few agonizing seconds before the high-resolution document loaded onto my screen. I scrolled past the boilerplate terms and bank disclosures. I went straight to the final page. There, on the bottom right corner, staring right back at me, was my own signature. It was blatantly forged. I leaned in close, examining the digital ink. The loops and angles mimicked my handwriting, perfectly capturing the way I usually crossed my T, but the pressure points were completely wrong. It lacked the fluid motion of a natural signature, looking stiff and carefully drawn. Someone familiar with my signature had deliberately practiced copying it until they felt confident enough to commit felony bank fraud. Right beneath the forged signature sat a bright blue digital notary stamp. I zoomed in on the seal. The name registered on the stamp read, Thomas Gregory. A cold wave of nausea washed over me. Thomas Gregory was a certified public accountant and a lifelong golfing buddy of my father, Harrison. They had played together at the local country club every Sunday for the past 15 years. Thomas had sat at our dining table eating Thanksgiving dinner with our family. He had watched me grow up. Now he had leveraged his professional credentials to falsely attest that I had stood before him, presented my state identification, and willingly signed away the equity of my grandfather's legacy. My parents and my brother had successfully extracted $200,000 in cash right under my nose. The sheer arrogance of assuming a financial investigator would not find out was staggering. I needed to know exactly where that money went. I opened a new tab and launched a highly secure financial tracing program I use daily at my firm. I fed the mortgage origination details into the search parameters, scanning the regional clearinghouse databases for the corresponding wire transfers. The bank had approved the loan 3 days ago, but large disbursements leave massive digital footprints. Within 10 minutes, the tracing software flagged the exact routing sequence. The entire $200,000 had not gone into a joint account or a home improvement fund. It had bypassed normal channels completely. The funds were wired in two separate, highly expedited transactions, directly to a commercial account registered to an entity called Platinum Prestige Events. A quick search confirmed my worst suspicions. Platinum Prestige Events was the most exclusive and outrageously expensive luxury wedding planning firm in downtown Chicago. They catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, organizing million-dollar receptions for socialites, politicians, and corporate tycoons. I sat back in my chair, the puzzle pieces violently slamming together. My parents had stolen from me to fund Blake's extravagant attempt to impress Jada's billionaire family. Jada's father expected a wedding that matched his immense social and financial standing. My parents, desperate to secure their place in the upper echelon of Chicago high society, could not afford to look like ordinary upper-middle-class citizens. They needed to project an image of limitless wealth, so they stole my equity to pay for custom floral arrangements, imported caviar, and a grand ballroom reception they could never legitimately afford on their own. The magnitude of the betrayal was suffocating. My father, Harrison, the man who always lectured me about financial responsibility, had orchestrated a felony. My mother, Caroline, the woman who just told me I was a canceled engagement mess, had happily spent my stolen equity on a wedding I was barely allowed to attend. And Blake, my golden child brother, was sitting comfortably in his high-rise office, pretending to be a self-made success story, while secretly funding his lifestyle with a fraudulent mortgage tied directly to my name. I closed the PDF containing my forged signature and saved a secure encrypted copy to my desktop. I then downloaded the routing details for the wire transfer to the luxury wedding planner. I captured every single piece of metadata attached to the transaction. I took screenshots of the notary stamp and downloaded the public registration details for Thomas Gregory. Every click of my mouse was a deliberate, calculated action. The initial shock had entirely burned away, leaving behind a razor-sharp focus. They thought I would simply comply with their ridiculous 5 demands. They thought I would blindly sign over my remaining 50% of the lake house deed, completely unaware that they had already drained its value. They believed I was currently too distracted by my own heartbreak to notice the financial theft occurring in the background. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated my professional capabilities and my capacity for ruthlessness when pushed into a corner. I did not shed a single tear over the stolen money. Crying was for victims, and I refused to be a victim. Instead, I opened a fresh digital dossier and labeled it Blake Wedding Fraud. I dragged the forged mortgage application into the folder. I dragged the wire transfer receipts into the folder. I had the foundation of a federal wire fraud case sitting right on my hard drive. But I knew this was just the surface. If they were willing to forge my signature and commit a federal crime for $200,000, their financial situation had to be far worse than anyone realized. I needed to dig deeper. I mapped out the entire financial structure of Blake's life before making my move. I grabbed my keys, locked my laptop in my safe, and marched out of my apartment. The drive to the suburbs took 45 minutes, but the anger simmering in my chest made it feel like seconds. I navigated the familiar highways, leaving the steel and glass of downtown Chicago behind for the sprawling manicured lawns of my childhood neighborhood. The houses here were large, imposing, and meticulously maintained to project an image of quiet generational wealth. My parents lived in a pristine brick colonial, a house they could barely afford, but refused to downsize because appearances were everything. I parked my car in the driveway right behind my father's leased Mercedes. I did not bother knocking. I used my old key and pushed the heavy mahogany door open. The house smelled faintly of expensive vanilla candles and roasting garlic. I walked straight down the hallway, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I found them in the formal living room. Harrison and Caroline were sitting on their plush white sofas, sipping imported red wine and reviewing what looked like catering menus. They looked so incredibly relaxed, so utterly unbothered by the fact that they had just committed a federal offense against their own daughter. Caroline looked up, her brow furrowing in immediate annoyance. "Nora," she said, setting her wineglass down. "What are you doing here? You look terrible. Did you even brush your hair today?" I did not answer her. I walked straight to the glass coffee table and slapped the printed loan documents down right on top of their wedding planning brochures. I had highlighted the forged signature and the fraudulent notary stamp in bright neon yellow. "You forged my signature for a $200,000 loan," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any shouting or tears. I was not a grieving daughter seeking an apology. I was an auditor presenting a damning ledger. My father Harrison leaned back slowly. He picked up his wineglass, took a measured sip, and looked at the documents. He did not gasp. He did not deny it. He did not even flinch. His expression remained entirely placid, as if I had merely pointed out a typo on a grocery list. "Your brother needs to project wealth to fit in with Jada's family," he said coldly, his gaze meeting mine without a single ounce of shame. "You know how high the stakes are right now. Her father is flying in executives from all over the world. Blake cannot look like he comes from a family of penny pinchers. He needs to show he belongs in their circle." I stared at the man who shared my DNA, trying to reconcile the father who raised me with the unrepentant criminal sitting in front of me. "So you committed bank fraud?" I asked, keeping my tone dangerously even. "You used your golfing buddy Thomas to illegally notarize a document to steal my equity." "It is not stealing, Nora," my mother chimed in, crossing her arms defensively. "It is family resource management. You have always been so selfish with your money. Blake is about to secure our family's future in Chicago high society. You should be honored to help him achieve that." "Honored." I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You stole $200,000 against the house Grandpa left me." Harrison set his glass down sharply, the first sign of irritation breaking through his calm facade. "Stop using that word, Nora. We leveraged an idle asset. You make 6 figures at your little accounting firm. You have no husband, no children, and frankly no major financial obligations now that your wedding is canceled. You can easily afford to pay the monthly installments on this loan." I stood there processing the sheer audacity of his extortion. They had not just stolen the money, they expected me to service the debt they created. "Think of it as your duty to the family," Harrison continued, his voice taking on a harsh, commanding edge. "You owe us for raising you. If you do not pay the monthly premium, the bank takes the house. It is entirely your choice. Pay the loan and keep your grandfather's precious cabin, or throw a tantrum, stop paying, and lose the property entirely. Either way, Blake gets the wedding he deserves, and you do your part." I looked at Caroline, expecting to see at least a flicker of maternal guilt, but she just nodded in agreement with my father. She reached for her wineglass, avoiding my eyes, but her silence was a resounding endorsement of the crime. They viewed me as nothing more than a bottomless cash reserve, a disposable asset designed solely to subsidize my brother's ascent into the billionaire class. They truly believed they had trapped me in an impossible dilemma. Pay their fraudulent debt or lose the only piece of my grandfather I had left. In the past, the old Nora might have screamed. I might have cried, begged for their love, and asked why I was never enough for them. I might have yelled until my throat was raw, trying to force them to recognize my humanity. But as I looked at the people who were supposed to protect me using blatant extortion to fund a fake high society facade, I felt the last remaining thread of familial loyalty snap. It did not hurt. It felt like a massive, suffocating weight had just been lifted off my chest. They wanted to play a high-stakes financial game. They wanted to use leverage and debt as weapons to force my compliance. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. I dismantled complex financial frauds for a living. I destroyed arrogant corporate criminals who thought they were untouchable every single day between the hours of 9 and 5. My parents had just handed me all the ammunition I needed to eradicate them completely. I did not argue. I did not threaten them with the police. I did not say a single word. I simply looked at Harrison, then at Caroline, committing their smug, entitled expressions to memory. I turned around and walked out of the living room, leaving the printed documents on the table. I heard my mother scoff behind me. "See, Harrison," she muttered. "I told you she would fall in line. She just needed a firm push. Let her pout. She will pay the mortgage." I walked out the front door and closed it quietly behind me. The crisp evening air hit my face as I walked down the driveway to my car. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. My pulse was steady. My mind was incredibly clear. I backed out of the driveway, leaving the suburban illusion behind. As I merged back onto the highway, heading toward the glowing skyline of downtown Chicago, I mentally prepared for the deep dive. The silent confrontation was over. Now the real destruction would begin. Driving back to downtown Chicago, a critical discrepancy gnawed at my analytical mind. If my parents had just given Blake $200,000 for the wedding, why was he extorting me for another $25,000 for his honeymoon? Something was catastrophically wrong with Blake's finances. I poured myself a black coffee, opened my firm's proprietary financial tracking software, and began a deep dive forensic audit into my own brother. I pulled his public tax IDs, cross-referenced property ownership, and dug into his corporate filings. The narrative he had sold to Jada's family was about to unravel. My apartment transformed into a tactical war room. I dragged my dual monitors to the center of the kitchen island and synced them with my secure network token. The soft blue glow of the screens illuminated the dark room as midnight approached. In my profession, you learn very quickly that wealthy people do not suddenly demand $25,000 in liquid cash from their estranged siblings unless a catastrophic deadline is looming. A man who was about to marry into a billionaire family should not be sweating over the cost of a plane ticket to Bora Bora. I started with the basics. I ran Blake's full legal name and social security number through the national credit bureaus, utilizing a legal loophole that allowed me to verify financial standing for co-owned real estate entities. The initial credit report was a masterclass in aggressive debt manipulation. On paper, Blake maintained an excellent credit score, but the utilization ratios on his revolving credit lines were pushed to the absolute brink. He had 14 active credit cards, and every single one of them was hovering just pennies below its maximum limit. He was floating balances, transferring debt from one account to another in a desperate shell game to avoid defaulting. But credit cards were just civilian debt. I needed to see the corporate architecture. I accessed the Illinois Secretary of State database and queried his name as a registered agent. Blake was a chief financial officer, so he knew how to hide his tracks, but he was arrogant. Arrogant men always leave digital fingerprints because they believe they are the smartest people in the room. I found his first limited liability company registered to a generic mailbox at a strip mall in the suburbs. It was called Apex Consulting Group. I pulled the corporate filings and scrutinized the annual reports. Apex had zero legitimate business activity. No public-facing website, no verified client roster, and absolutely zero payroll expenses. It was a ghost ship. I initiated a deep search into the banking nodes associated with Apex. Using my firm's investigative software, I tracked the inbound and outbound wire transfers tied to the company's employer identification number. The screen populated with a staggering list of transactions. Money was flowing into Apex in large, erratic bursts. $30,000 here, $50,000 there. The funds were not coming from clients. They were coming from short-term, high-yield commercial lenders. Blake was taking out predatory business loans under the guise of an operational consulting firm. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing where the money went after it hit the Apex account. The outbound wires painted a pathetic picture of a man desperate to project an illusion of extreme wealth. I saw thousands of dollars routed to a luxury car dealership, paying the exorbitant monthly lease on his imported sports car. I found recurring payments to high-end tailors, exclusive country clubs, and premium watch dealers. He was literally wearing borrowed money. The Rolex on his wrist, the tailored Italian suits, the lavish dinners he posted on social media to impress Jada's family, it was all entirely funded by predatory debt. But the luxury expenses only accounted for a fraction of the missing funds. There were massive black holes in the ledger. Huge sums of cash were being withdrawn directly from the corporate accounts and vanishing into thin air. I cross-referenced the dates of these cash withdrawals with Blake's public social media footprint. Every time a large withdrawal occurred, Blake was checked into various high-stakes poker rooms and underground casino events across the Midwest. The truth hit me with absolute clarity. My brother was not just a social climber with a spending problem, he was a severe gambling addict. The pieces of his desperate extortion attempt suddenly aligned perfectly. The $200,000 he had stolen from my house equity was not just to fund a lavish wedding reception. It was a stopgap measure. He needed that stolen equity to appease his most aggressive creditors and keep his fabricated life from collapsing before he could officially tie the knot. He was sprinting toward the altar, viewing Jada and her billionaire father not as family, but as a permanent financial bailout. Once he married Jada, he would have access to her generational wealth, enabling him to quietly erase his debts and continue his toxic lifestyle. The $25,000 he demanded from me for his honeymoon was likely the final payment required to silence a bookie or a desperate attempt to cover the last of his immediate gambling losses. He was suffocating under the weight of his own lies, and he was using my parents' profound need for social validation to finance his survival. I took a long sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter taste sharpen my focus. I had unraveled the outer layer of his deception, but the scope of his fraud was expanding exponentially. A man in Blake's position managing the finances of a major real estate firm while drowning in $500,000 of personal debt was a walking red flag. In the financial world, we call this the fraud triangle. He had the pressure and the rationalization. As a chief financial officer, he had the opportunity. I opened a new search window, my hands flying across the keyboard. The narrative he had sold to Jada's family was about to unravel entirely. I spent hours tracing a web of limited liability companies registered under Blake's name. What I found was a graveyard of debt. Blake wasn't a successful CFO, he was a desperate gambler hiding massive losses. He had taken out predatory high-interest loans to maintain his luxury cars and tailored suits. He was drowning in nearly $500,000 of hidden debt. The $200,000 he stole from my house wasn't just for the wedding, it was to keep his creditors from breaking his legs before he could marry into extreme wealth. To truly understand the depth of his financial depravity, I needed to dismantle the corporate architecture he had built. Blake had not simply walked into a standard bank and asked for a personal loan. A traditional financial institution would have immediately flagged his debt-to-income ratio and denied the application. Instead, he had constructed a sophisticated labyrinth of dummy corporations designed specifically to absorb and obscure his massive liabilities. I pulled up the public records for the state of Illinois and started mapping the network on my secondary monitor. The first entity I found was Apex Consulting Group. It was just the tip of an ugly iceberg. Connected to Apex were three other limited liability companies: Horizon Logistics, Vanguard Strategy Partners, Summit Holdings. The names were intentionally bland and corporate, meant to look impressive on a ledger, while meaning absolutely nothing in reality. I cross-referenced the registered agent details for each company. Blake used different registered agent services to mask his ownership, but the mailing addresses all ultimately routed back to the exact same private post office box in a quiet suburban strip mall. I dove into the financial filings for Vanguard Strategy Partners. This specific company had secured a massive line of credit from a shadow lender operating out of Delaware. Shadow lenders do not ask for detailed business plans or verify client rosters. They ask for collateral, and they charge exorbitant interest rates that border on illegal. Blake had secured a staggering $150,000 loan under the Vanguard name. The collateral listed on the promissory note made my stomach turn. He had used an inflated appraisal of our parents' suburban home as a secondary guarantee. He had successfully manipulated Harrison and Caroline into backing his phantom corporate debt. They willingly placed a massive target on their own roof to see him succeed. Next, I opened the ledger for Horizon Logistics. This company showed a different pattern of financial abuse. While Vanguard was used to secure bulk cash, Horizon was essentially a digital washing machine. I tracked the inbound transfers. Blake moved small amounts of money from his salary account into Horizon, labeling them operational expenses. Once the money hit the Horizon account, it was immediately withdrawn as cash at various automated teller machines located near high-stakes poker rooms and off-track betting parlors. He was systematically draining his own legitimate income and running it through a fake company to hide the paper trail from any future spouse. I exported the dizzying volume of transactions into a master spreadsheet, running a pivot table to categorize the expenses. The math painted a terrifying picture. Over the past 24 months, Blake had hemorrhaged almost $500,000. He was losing money faster than he could ever legitimately earn it. Every single paycheck, every bonus, every fraudulent loan was instantly swallowed by his addiction. The luxury facade he presented to the world, the tailored suits, the expensive dinners, the lavish gifts for Jada was a completely hollow shell. He was functionally bankrupt. I sat back and rubbed my eyes, staring at the endless rows of red numbers on my screen. The cruelty of his demands for the wedding suddenly made perfect sense. He was not just trying to humiliate me or assert dominance. He was a cornered animal fighting for survival. The $25,000 he demanded for the honeymoon was not meant for plane tickets or luxury bungalows. It was the exact amount due on a balloon payment for a high-interest loan tied to Summit Holdings. If he missed that payment, the lender would initiate aggressive collection protocols. The carefully curated image he had presented to Jada's billionaire father would instantly shatter. Blake was attempting to buy enough time to walk down the aisle. He believed that once he secured the marriage certificate, he would have unrestricted access to generational wealth. He viewed Jada as a human bailout plan. Her family possessed the kind of money that could make $500,000 of debt disappear with a single phone call. He just needed to survive until the wedding day. And he was perfectly willing to sacrifice my financial security, my grandfather's legacy, and our parents' home to cross that finish line. I switched my focus to the most recent transactions targeting the $200,000 he had stolen from my house equity. As I traced the flow of those specific funds, I noticed an alarming pattern that extended beyond mere gambling debts. The money had indeed flowed through the luxury wedding planner, but there was a secondary layer of disbursement. Blake had intentionally overpaid the planner, requesting that the excess funds be routed to a third-party vendor for specialized catering services. I ran a quick background check on the catering vendor. The company did not exist. The routing number attached to the catering payment belonged to a private offshore account. He was siphoning money from his own fraudulent wedding budget and stashing it away as a desperate contingency fund. My brother was orchestrating a multi-tiered financial scam, actively deceiving the bank, our parents, and his future bride. He was playing a very dangerous game with elite people who absolutely did not tolerate failure or embarrassment. The entire foundation was crumbling. He was running out of time, and I was about to accelerate his downfall. The ugly truth was finally laid bare. The mechanics of the escrow accounts were shockingly simple once I stripped away the complex corporate jargon. Jada's father ran a massive commercial real estate trust, specializing in luxury developments and commercial high-rises across the Midwest. When acquiring these towering properties, tens of millions of dollars sat in escrow accounts to cover due diligence, environmental surveys, and legal retainers. Blake, as the chief financial officer, had top-tier authorization to release these funds to approved vendors. He was creating phantom invoices from Apex Consulting Group for these fictitious services. Since Apex was registered under a proxy agent, the internal compliance team at the firm never flagged the vendor as a conflict of interest. He was exploiting a massive blind spot in their internal control system. I pulled up the transaction history for the past 18 months, correlating the dates with Blake's employment record. He started small, testing the waters to see if anyone was paying attention. A $10,000 payment for a fake structural assessment here. A $15,000 charge for phantom zoning consultations there. But as his gambling addiction spiraled completely out of control, his embezzlement grew exponentially. The most recent withdrawals were terrifying in their brazenness. He had authorized a single wire transfer of $80,000 just last month, masking it as a retainer for an overseas architecture firm. That money bypassed the real estate firm entirely and went straight into Vanguard Strategy Partners, one of his shell companies, before disappearing into a casino cage in Las Vegas. The sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. Jada's father was a titan in the Chicago business world. He had built his empire breaking through systemic barriers and fighting for every inch of ground in a notoriously cutthroat industry. His firm was legendary for its integrity and community investment. He trusted Blake enough to hand him the keys to the financial kingdom and welcome him into his home as a future son-in-law. Blake repaid that immense trust by using the firm as his personal automated teller machine. He was essentially a parasite feeding off the success of a proud family that had welcomed him with open arms. I needed undeniable proof. A simple spreadsheet would not be enough to convince federal authorities or a billionaire patriarch who currently believed my brother was the perfect addition to his family. I needed to connect the digital dots with absolute certainty. I used a specialized data extraction protocol to pull the digital signatures on the approval forms. Every single fraudulent invoice bore Blake's unique cryptographic approval key. He was approving payments to his own shell companies from his designated office terminal. I even managed to pull the internet protocol addresses for the login sessions, confirming he was authorizing these transfers while physically sitting inside his future father-in-law's headquarters. As the magnitude of the theft became clear on my screens, I realized the timeline for the wedding was not just about social climbing. It was a strict deadline for survival. Major real estate investment trusts are required by federal law to conduct comprehensive third-party financial audits at the end of their fiscal year. I checked the corporate calendar for the firm. Their annual audit was scheduled to begin exactly 3 weeks after the wedding date. Blake knew his embezzlement would not survive an independent forensic review. The phantom invoices would be flagged, the shell companies would be exposed, and the missing funds would trigger an immediate federal investigation. His entire strategy finally made perfect twisted sense. He needed to marry Jada before the auditors arrived. Once he was officially part of the family, he likely planned to manufacture a fake market crisis or use his new status as the billionaire's son-in-law to somehow cover the missing funds. Or perhaps he arrogantly believed that if he was caught after the wedding, Jada's father would quietly absorb the massive losses and bury the scandal to protect his daughter from the public humiliation of marrying a federal criminal. My parents were completely oblivious pawns in his game. They thought they were funding a high society fairy tale. In reality, they were financing a criminal's desperate sprint away from a federal indictment. The sheer volume of the evidence was staggering. I systematically categorized every fraudulent invoice, every approved wire transfer, and every forged document into a pristine chain of custody. I created a secure encrypted folder specifically designated for the federal authorities: Wire Fraud Bank, Fraud Embezzlement, and Money Laundering. The charges carried mandatory minimum sentences that would put Blake behind bars for decades. My cold, detached professional mind processed these facts with zero empathy. He had made his choices. He had forged my signature, stolen my equity, and told me to sit in a corner like a discarded piece of trash. He had brought this destruction entirely upon himself. But I also realized the immense danger Jada and her family were currently facing. They were walking blindly into a financial catastrophe that could severely damage their business reputation and their personal lives. While Jada had always been condescending and aloof toward me, projecting a superiority that mirrored my brother's arrogance, she did not deserve to be financially ruined. She did not deserve to be dragged into a massive federal scandal by a manipulative predator. Her father had worked too hard to build his legacy, only to have it dismantled by a greedy gambling addict. I continued running the extraction protocols, gathering every shred of data I could safely access without triggering the firm's internal cybersecurity alarms. I organized the financial ledgers matching the stolen escrow funds directly to the corresponding deposits in Blake's hidden accounts. I highlighted the matching timestamps, making the trail of stolen money impossible to ignore or deny. The story the numbers told was absolutely flawless, leaving no room for excuses or legal maneuvering. As I finished compiling the evidence regarding the embezzled escrow funds, I noticed one final anomaly hidden deep within the cross-referenced data. It was a series of loan applications that had been filed independently from the shell companies. These documents were not tied to the real estate firm or the forged Lake House mortgage. They were connected to a completely different set of social security numbers. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the digital forms. The forensic puzzle was about to reveal its darkest and most destructive piece, yet confirming that Blake was actively destroying the financial future of the woman standing next to him at the altar. The final piece of the puzzle made my stomach turn. Blake had used Jada's personal social security number to co-sign on two massive offshore business loans. Jada was completely unaware. Her family, who prided themselves on an impeccable reputation and generational excellence in the African American business community, was unknowingly harboring a financial parasite who was setting their daughter up for federal indictment. Blake wasn't just marrying Jada, he was framing her as an unwitting accomplice to wire fraud. I pulled the origination files from the Shadow Lenders database, navigating through a series of encrypted portals based in the Cayman Islands. These institutions deliberately catered to high-risk clients who needed fast liquidity and possessed zero ethical boundaries. They operated outside the jurisdiction of standard American banking regulations, meaning they cared absolutely nothing about the legalities of the signatures on their promissory notes. All they cared about was the underlying collateral. When I decrypted the applicant data, my jaw tightly clenched. Blake had not simply used Jada as a standard character reference. He had explicitly listed her as the primary guarantor. He had leveraged her pristine credit rating and her status as an executive board member of her father's real estate investment trust. I stared at the digital copies of her government-issued identification, her passport, and her private financial statements that had been uploaded to the lender's portal. As her fiancé, he had unfettered access to her most sensitive personal documents. He had weaponized that trust to secure $300,000 in highly toxic, unregulated debt. The interest rates attached to these offshore loans were absolutely predatory, compounding weekly at a rate that guaranteed default. The sheer malice of his strategy was staggering. By attaching Jada's name and social security number to these specific loans, Blake had effectively tethered his toxic liabilities directly to her father's multi-billion-dollar empire. When those offshore lenders inevitably called the debt, they would not waste their time pursuing a bankrupt chief financial officer with zero liquid assets. They would immediately initiate aggressive collection protocols against the primary guarantor. They would place devastating financial liens on Jada's personal assets, which were deeply intertwined with her family's corporate holdings. Blake was constructing a perfect, inescapable trap. Once they were legally married in the state of Illinois, the financial boundaries between them would dissolve. His debt would legally merge with her wealth. If she discovered the forgery after the wedding, he would already hold all the leverage. He knew Jada's family protected their flawless public image at all costs. He was betting his entire survival on the fact that her billionaire father would quietly pay off the offshore accounts and bury the federal crimes just to shield his daughter from a catastrophic public scandal. Blake viewed their deep-seated family pride as his ultimate insurance policy. I sat back, letting the cold blue light of the monitors wash over my face. The forensic data painted a crystal-clear picture of a predator methodically isolating his prey. Jada had always treated me with a distinct layer of icy condescension. During family dinners, she would subtly mock my career as a simple accountant while bragging about her philanthropic galas and elite social circles. She had eagerly participated in my parents' blatant favoritism, treating Blake like a brilliant corporate titan while completely dismissing my existence. I did not like her. We were never going to be friends. But no one deserves to be framed for federal wire fraud. No one deserves to have their personal identity weaponized to fund a gambling addiction. And no woman, regardless of her arrogance, deserves to walk down the aisle toward a man who is actively orchestrating her financial ruin. I shifted my focus back to the keyboard, my fingers typing with mechanical precision. I needed to build a firewall of undeniable proof that completely exonerated Jada while burying my brother. I isolated the internet protocol addresses logged during the exact moments the offshore loan applications were submitted and signed. I cross-referenced those timestamps with Jada's public social media activity and her corporate calendar, which I accessed through the firm's open directory. The data matched perfectly in my favor. At the precise moment the digital signatures were applied to the fraudulent Cayman Island loans, Jada had been tagged at a high-profile charity luncheon on the completely opposite side of Chicago. The internet protocol addresses, tied to the loan submissions, routed directly back to Blake's private office terminal at her father's real estate firm. The digital footprint proved without a shadow of a doubt that Blake had acted alone, stealing her identity, while she was entirely engaged elsewhere. I extracted the geolocation data, the login timestamps, and the forged digital certificates. I compiled these specific files into a highly classified subfolder, labeling it Target Guarantor Fraud. I meticulously highlighted the discrepancies, drawing a bright neon line between Blake's physical location and the fraudulent offshore applications. I formatted the evidence so that a billionaire patriarch who spent his life analyzing complex real estate portfolios would understand the betrayal within 60 seconds of reading the executive summary. My brother thought he was a mastermind playing a game of high-stakes chess with the elite. He believed his superficial charm and expensive tailored suits could mask the rotting foundation of his fabricated life. He assumed he could outsmart the banking system, outsmart his future father-in-law, and easily bully his quiet younger sister into giving up her only real estate asset. He was wrong on every single count. I finished locking the encrypted files and safely backed up the entire drive to an offline secure server. The comprehensive forensic audit was now fully complete. I possessed the exact financial coordinates of his destruction. I had the wire fraud, the embezzlement, the forged lake house mortgage, and the offshore identity theft perfectly mapped out and ready for deployment. The sheer volume of federal crimes sitting on my hard drive carried mandatory minimum sentences that would ensure Blake spent the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. Now it was time to play my part. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I needed to give them absolute compliance, so they would completely lower their defenses. I picked up my phone, navigating to the family group chat, where their arrogant demands were still sitting unread. The trap was fully constructed. Now I just needed to invite them inside. I screenshotted every message, archiving their smug complicity in a secure cloud folder. The game was officially in motion. To pull off a deception of this magnitude, I needed to play my role with absolute perfection. I could not give them a single reason to suspect that the quiet, obedient sister they had bullied for decades was currently orchestrating their complete financial annihilation. If Blake sensed even a fraction of resistance, he might accelerate his timeline or attempt to access more of my compromised assets. I needed him comfortable. I needed him arrogant. I needed him to believe he had definitively won. My first task was acquiring the costume. Blake had specifically demanded I wear an old plain gray dress from a discount website. He wanted me to look impoverished to serve as a visual contrast to his fabricated wealth. I went online and ordered the exact shapeless polyester garment he had sent a link to. When it arrived 2 days later, I hung it on the back of my bedroom door. It was hideous. The fabric was stiff, the color resembled wet concrete, and the cut was designed to make the wearer entirely invisible. It was the perfect camouflage. I would let them see me as the pathetic broken woman they desperately wanted me to be, right up until the moment the trap snapped shut. Later that afternoon, my father Harrison called. I let it ring twice before answering, ensuring my voice sounded appropriately subdued and defeated. Nora, he began using that faux authoritative tone he reserved for business subordinates. Your mother and I are glad you decided to stop throwing a tantrum. The deed transfer paperwork needs to be clean. Do not complicate this. I kept my breathing steady. I will not complicate anything, I replied quietly. I have the documents ready, and I will hand them over exactly as requested. I know what my duty to this family is now. Harrison exhaled a long breath of satisfaction. Good. Blake is under a massive amount of pressure with Jada's family arriving from out of town. He does not need his little sister causing a scene. Bring the cashier's check for the honeymoon directly to the reception venue. Do not hand it to him during the ceremony. We want the financial exchange kept strictly discreet. Understood, I said. I will drop it off at the designated gift table. The sheer arrogance of his instructions was breathtaking. He was actively managing the logistics of my extortion as if he were planning a corporate luncheon. He truly believed he had successfully bullied me into financing his son's fraudulent lifestyle. I ended the call and immediately logged the timestamp into my forensic ledger. Every interaction was another layer of proof that my parents were fully aware and complicit in the financial demands, even if they remained oblivious to Blake's massive offshore embezzlement. For the next 48 hours, I maintained absolute digital silence. I did not post on social media. I did not text my friends. I became a ghost. I needed my family to interpret my silence as submission. Meanwhile, I watched their digital footprints expand with sickening entitlement. Caroline posted endless updates about the lavish floral arrangements and the imported silk table runners. She tagged Jada's billionaire father in every single post, desperately clinging to his coattails to elevate her own social standing. Blake posted photos of himself standing next to luxury rented sports cars, wearing a custom tuxedo funded entirely by stolen equity. He captioned his posts with motivational quotes about hard work and building an empire. I sat at my kitchen island drinking black coffee and watching them construct their own gallows. The fraud triangle was complete. They had the pressure of high society, the rationalization of family duty, and the opportunity of my forged signature. They had built a massive house of cards on a foundation of gasoline, and they were currently handing me the match. But I was not about to leave my own financial flank exposed. Deceptive compliance required securing my perimeter. I contacted all 3 major credit bureaus and placed a maximum security freeze on my social security number. I added verbal password requirements to every single banking account, investment portfolio, and retirement fund I possessed. I set up real-time alert triggers for any inquiry tied to my name or my grandfather's lake house trust. If Blake or his corrupt notary friend Thomas attempted to extract even $1 more before Saturday, the banking algorithms would instantly lock them out and notify federal authorities. I also needed to create the physical props to sell my compliance on the day of the wedding. I drove to a local office supply store and purchased a heavy-duty legal folder. Inside, I placed a stack of generic tax forms and dummy contracts, mimicking the weight and appearance of a highly official real estate transfer deed. I placed a blank voided check inside a crisp white envelope labeling it Bora Bora Honeymoon Fund. This would serve as the decoy. I would not be attending the reception, but I needed Blake to believe these items were in transit until the exact moment his world collapsed. I returned to my apartment and placed the decoy folder next to my laptop. Everything was meticulously arranged. The timeline was set. My family believed they had successfully crushed my spirit and stolen my assets. They believed I was sitting alone in my apartment, crying over my canceled engagement and preparing to grovel at their feet. They expected me to walk into that grand ballroom wearing my cheap gray dress, head bowed in absolute submission. They had no idea that I was not preparing for a wedding. I was preparing for a controlled demolition. I closed my laptop screen and took a deep breath. The deceptive phase of the operation was flawlessly executed. They were completely unguarded. Now it was time to move to the next phase. It was time to unleash the legal counterstrike. The attorney smiled and began drafting the paperwork. His name was Caldwell, and he was a shark in a tailored suit who understood exactly what I was asking for. We were not just filing a routine civil dispute over a piece of property. We were launching a highly targeted financial missile directly at my family's foundation. I sat across from his massive oak desk, watching him review the digital forensic evidence I had meticulously compiled. He noted the stiff, unnatural pressure points of the forged signature on the loan documents. He carefully examined the metadata attached to the digital notary stamp belonging to Thomas Gregory. Caldwell immediately drafted a formal complaint to the state licensing board, demanding the immediate revocation of Thomas Gregory's notary commission. The complaint also formally requested a criminal probe into his professional conduct. Thomas was going to lose his state license, his lucrative accounting career, and very likely his personal freedom, all because he wanted to do a quick illegal favor for his weekend golfing buddy. My father had dragged his closest friend into a federal crime, and I felt absolutely no pity for either of them. Next, we tackled the bank itself. Caldwell prepared a heavy, comprehensive dossier for the federal banking regulators and the specific financial institution that had issued the $200,000 home equity line of credit. The letter he drafted was an absolute masterpiece of legal intimidation. It clearly and aggressively outlined how the bank had failed their most basic fiduciary duties by accepting a fraudulent signature on a dual trust property without proper identity verification. To avoid a massive catastrophic compliance lawsuit, the bank would have to act instantly to mitigate their own exposure. They would immediately freeze the dispersed funds and strictly lock down the primary accounts of the individuals who had committed the fraud. I leaned across the polished conference table and reiterated my most crucial demand regarding the timeline. The execution had to be absolutely flawless. I told Caldwell the emergency injunction and the fraud notification must be officially filed and received by the bank's automated systems late Friday afternoon. Because major financial institutions operate on specific batch processing schedules, the algorithms would trigger the total asset freeze on Saturday exactly at noon. Saturday at noon was the precise moment the luxury wedding planners, the high-end caterers, the custom florists, and the downtown Chicago hotel venue would run their final pre-wedding credit authorizations. My parents had undoubtedly put down substantial initial deposits, but the massive final balances for a $300,000 high society wedding are almost always processed on the day of the event to account for last-minute adjustments. When those elite vendors attempted to run Harrison and Caroline's credit cards or process their final wire transfers, every single transaction would be aggressively declined. The bank terminals would flash a hard code indicating a federal fraud lock. My parents would be standing in their expensive formal wear, surrounded by Jada's elite billionaire family, completely unable to pay for the grand illusion they had so desperately constructed. The embarrassment would be instantaneous and catastrophic. They would have zero access to their checking accounts, their savings, or their extensive investment portfolios. The financial guillotine would drop right in the middle of their perfect day, severing them from their stolen wealth. But I needed to protect my own flank first. Caldwell drew up a comprehensive legal severance of liability. By proving the signature was forged, I was legally detaching my Social Security number and my pristine personal credit history from the fraudulent mortgage. The massive debt would fall entirely on Harrison, Caroline, and Blake. However, because the fraud was committed against the property itself, the bank would still place a hard federal lien on the lake house. the beautiful sanctuary my grandfather built would be locked down by investigators. I felt a brief fleeting pang of sorrow for the old wooden dock and the warm summer memories, but I quickly pushed the emotion aside. A building is just wood and glass. I was not going to let nostalgia drag me into a federal indictment or tie me to their sinking ship. The house was a casualty of their boundless greed, and I accepted that structural loss to secure my absolute unshakable freedom. For the next 3 hours, I sat in Caldwell's office, signing affidavits and providing sworn legal testimony regarding my exact whereabouts on the day the loan was supposedly notarized. I handed over my corporate badge swipes, my vehicle GPS data, and my office building access logs, proving I was miles away from Thomas Gregory's office when the deed was fraudulently signed. The alibi was totally airtight. There was not a single crack in the armor I was building around myself. Caldwell collated the hundreds of pages of documentation, binding them into thick, heavy legal folders. When we finally finished the heavy lifting, he looked across the desk at me. He had handled hundreds of vicious corporate divorces and hostile corporate takeovers, but he seemed genuinely impressed by the sheer meticulousness of my preparation. He asked if I felt any hesitation about pulling the trigger on my own blood relatives, knowing it would destroy them completely. I looked him dead in the eye and told him they stopped being my relatives the moment they decided to use my identity to fund a lie. I was simply auditing a corrupt entity that happened to share my last name. Caldwell nodded slowly, stamped the final injunction request with his official seal, and placed it securely in his outgoing digital queue. The legal counterstrike was officially loaded into the chamber, and my parents were completely unaware of the target painted on their backs. I stood up from the leather chair, smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored skirt, and shook his hand. The initial legal framework was now completely locked in place, guaranteeing their financial ruin. I walked out of his office feeling a profound sense of clarity. I spent the next 2 nights compiling everything. I didn't rely on emotion, I relied on indisputable, cold, hard data. I created a 3-page executive summary outlining Blake's embezzlement scheme, his hidden shell companies, the forged mortgage, and the fraudulent loans taken out in Jada's name. I attached bank routing numbers, wire transfer receipts, and time-stamped internal ledgers. I loaded all the digital evidence onto a secure encrypted USB drive and placed the drive along with the executive summary into a sleek black gift box wrapped with a silver ribbon. But I knew perfectly well that a simple USB drive was not going to be enough. Real estate billionaires prefer tactile proof. They want to hold the destruction in their hands, see the ink, and feel the liability. I bought a heavy leather-bound portfolio. I loaded it with premium stock paper, printing every screenshot and forensic chart. I treated this as a hostile corporate takeover briefing. The portfolio held 4 distinct exhibits. Exhibit A contained the paper trail of the Lake House fraud. I included the forged signature analysis, the metadata isolating the fake notary stamp and wire transfers, proving my parents funneled the stolen equity directly to the luxury wedding planner. It established a clear baseline of moral bankruptcy. Exhibit B was the kill shot containing undeniable proof of Blake's embezzlement from the real estate investment trust. I printed the phony invoices from Apex Consulting Group, placing them beside the internal escrow disbursement logs. I highlighted the matching amounts in crimson ink. I included the Internet Protocol addresses tracing fraudulent approvals directly back to Blake's office terminal inside the company headquarters. I made it impossible to claim this was an accounting error. The numbers painted a vivid picture of systematic, calculated theft by a man who felt entitled. Exhibit C documented the offshore loans in the Cayman Islands. This was the section designed to trigger maximum protective rage in a billionaire father. I printed out the loan origination documents bearing Jada's stolen Social Security number. I included the digital timestamps proving my brother had actively framed his own bride for federal wire fraud while she was busy attending charity luncheons on the other side of the city. I laid out the compounding interest rates, showing exactly how fast these toxic loans would default and trigger aggressive collection protocols against Jada's personal assets. Exhibit D was a financial autopsy of Blake's personal ruin. It featured his maxed-out credit card statements, the predatory high-interest loans under his shell companies, and the direct cash withdrawals at various high-stakes poker rooms and underground casinos. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the man standing at the altar was a degenerate gambler with zero liquid assets. His tailored suits, his luxury vehicles, and his arrogant smirk were entirely financed by stolen money and predatory debt. On top of the 4 exhibits, I placed a personalized cover letter addressed directly to Jada's father. I did not use a familiar tone. I addressed him as a fellow financial professional, speaking from one auditor to a corporate titan. I introduced myself, stated my credentials, and clearly outlined the catastrophic liability his family was about to absorb. I explained that I was providing this information not out of spite, but out of a professional obligation to prevent a massive federal crime from infecting his legacy. I ended the letter with a single devastating sentence. "You spent a lifetime building your empire. Do not let my brother dismantle it in a day." I placed the heavy leather-bound portfolio into the sleek black gift box, right next to the encrypted USB drive. I adjusted the silver ribbon, making sure the presentation looked exactly like a high-end corporate offering. There was a profound psychological weight to the box. It felt heavy with consequence. It was a perfectly constructed bomb waiting to be detonated in the middle of a grand ballroom. With the primary weapon fully assembled, I turned my attention to the decoy. Blake and my parents needed to believe I had submitted to their extortion. I grabbed a plain white envelope and a cheap greeting card. I wrote a brief submissive note congratulating the happy couple on their special day. Inside the card, I placed the fake property deed transfer I had mocked up earlier. Next, I took out my personal checkbook. I wrote a check for $25,000, making it payable to Blake. Then, using a thick black permanent marker, I wrote the word void across the entire face of the check in massive block letters. I placed the voided check and the fake deed into the envelope, sealing it tightly. On the front, I wrote Bora Bora Honeymoon Fund. This was the envelope I would leave at the designated gift table near the kitchen doors. It was the physical manifestation of my deceptive compliance. When Blake eventually ripped it open expecting a massive payday, he would find absolutely nothing but worthless paper. I arranged both packages on my kitchen island. The sleek black box bound for the billionaire patriarch and the cheap white envelope bound for the greedy groom. I stepped back and took a long look at my handiwork. The sheer contrast between the two items perfectly mirrored the dual reality of the upcoming wedding. My phone vibrated loudly on the cold marble counter. It was a group text from my mother, Caroline. "Do not forget your curfew, Nora. The photographer arrives at 8 sharp, and we do not want awkward background clutter." I ignored her message. I simply picked up the sleek black gift box and placed it carefully into my secure travel safe. I set the combination lock and spun the dial. The audit was closed. The evidence was secured. Every single piece of the board was exactly where it needed to be. I turned off the lights in my home office and walked to my bedroom to pack up my suitcase for Bali. I knew that if I handed the box to Blake, he would destroy it. If I handed it to my parents, they would burn it to protect him. I needed to bypass the gatekeepers completely. I hired an ultra-discreet bonded executive courier service in Chicago. I paid a premium for guaranteed signature-required delivery. The instructions were exact. Deliver this package at exactly 7:30 p.m. on Saturday to the VIP table at the Grand Ballroom. Hand it directly and only to Jada's father. The firm I selected was Vanguard Secure Logistics, a company that routinely handled highly sensitive corporate espionage files, diamond transfers, and classified legal documents. They did not employ teenagers on bicycles. They employed former military personnel and off-duty private security contractors. I walked into their downtown office on Thursday afternoon, sliding the sleek black box across the brushed steel counter. The logistics manager, a broad-shouldered man named Vance, reviewed my specific parameters with absolute professionalism. "I need this delivery to bypass all standard wedding security," I explained, handing him the itinerary I had extracted from my mother's endless group chat updates. The event is at the luxury hotel downtown. Jada's family has hired private security to manage the guest list and keep the press away. The courier must be dressed in a formal black suit. He must bypass the gift table, bypass the wedding planner, and walk directly onto the floor of the grand ballroom. Vance did not blink. He simply nodded and typed the instructions into his terminal. "We handle high-security event penetrations frequently," he said. "We will designate one of our senior operatives for this route. He will carry a corporate legal mandate asserting that the package contains time-sensitive federal compliance documents that require the immediate physical signature of the recipient. Wedding security will not intercept federal compliance paperwork addressed to a billionaire real estate magnate." I smiled internally. It was the perfect Trojan horse. Jada's father was a man completely obsessed with his business empire. If security told him there was an urgent federal document requiring his signature, he would absolutely demand they let the courier through. He would never allow a potential regulatory issue to fester even on his daughter's wedding day. The timing is the most critical element. I continued sliding a cashier's check across the counter to cover their exorbitant premium fee. 7:30 in the evening. Not a minute before, and not a minute after. I had chosen that exact time for a very specific operational reason. According to the meticulously curated wedding schedule my mother had bragged about, online dinner service would conclude at exactly 7:15. At 7:45, the father of the bride was scheduled to stand up, tap his crystal champagne glass, and deliver a lavish welcoming toast to his new son-in-law. By orchestrating the delivery for 7:30, I was ensuring that Jada's father would open the black box and read the forensic audit while sitting at the head table, completely surrounded by his closest associates. He would see the indisputable proof of Blake's embezzlement right before he was supposed to publicly welcome the criminal into his powerful family. It was a perfectly timed detonation designed to inflict maximum psychological shock and prevent Blake from executing any last-minute damage control. Vance printed a detailed service contract and highlighted the delivery window. "Our operative will send a secure encrypted text message to your phone the exact second the package changes hands and the signature is acquired," he assured me. "You will have real-time confirmation of the strike." I signed the contract authorizing the deployment. With the primary weapon now in the hands of professionals, I returned to my apartment to finalize my own extraction strategy. Deceptive compliance was only effective if I played my part flawlessly until I was safely out of the blast radius. I needed to plant the decoy envelope, the one containing the fake deed and the voided $25,000 check, so Blake and my parents would remain blissfully arrogant throughout the ceremony. I pulled out my phone and drafted a message to a junior assistant at my accounting firm. Her name was Riley, an ambitious graduate who owed me a favor for helping her navigate a tax audit. I offered her $500 for a simple task: dress in plain dark clothing, take a cab to the hotel at 3 in the afternoon, and quietly slip my white envelope onto the designated wedding gift table before the reception began. Riley accepted the task immediately. By utilizing a proxy to deliver the decoy, I was completely eliminating my physical presence from the venue. I would not have to face my smug parents or look at my brother's arrogant smile. I would not have to endure the humiliation of sitting in a dark corner wearing a cheap gray dress. My physical absence would be interpreted as ultimate submission. They would assume I had dropped off the envelope and slunk away in shame exactly as demanded. I spent Friday evening packing my luggage. I folded lightweight linen pants, silk blouses, and comfortable sandals. I secured my passport, verified banking tokens, and emergency cash reserves in my carry-on bag. I wiped my work laptop, executing a data scrub to ensure no trace of my forensic audit remained on any local hard drive. Every piece of evidence was safely locked in the cloud. As midnight approached, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my quiet apartment, looking out over the glittering city skyline. Tomorrow, the fragile financial structure of my entire family would completely collapse. The bank would abruptly freeze their accounts at noon. The courier would deliver the fatal blow at 7:30. And I would be 30,000 feet in the air, untethered and fully untouchable. I closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and went to sleep with a perfectly clear conscience, knowing justice was coming. Saturday morning arrived. The Chicago sky was clear, completely contrasting the storm I was about to unleash. My phone pinged with a text from Caroline. "Remember, sit in the back. Do not embarrass us tonight." I didn't reply. Instead of putting on the ugly gray dress Blake demanded, I packed my luggage, put on a comfortable travel outfit, and requested an Uber. As my family was posing for pre-wedding photos in their tuxedos and designer gowns completely funded by stolen money, I was rolling my suitcase through the sliding doors of O'Hare International Airport. The doors slid shut behind me, sealing me inside the departure terminal. It was pure escape. I glanced down at my phone. It was 10:30 in the morning. My parents were currently at the luxury downtown hotel sipping complimentary champagne. They were entirely oblivious that the financial ground beneath their feet was rapidly dissolving. My phone vibrated in my palm. It was another message in the family group chat, this time from Harrison. "Make sure you do not speak to Jada's father if he walks past your table, Nora. We have a highly sensitive real estate discussion planned for later this evening, and your presence is not required." The sheer magnitude of his arrogance was breathtaking. He truly believed he was about to sit down with a billionaire titan and discuss elite commercial investments. He had absolutely no idea that in just a few hours, that same billionaire would be reading a meticulously documented forensic audit exposing his son as an embezzling criminal. I swiped the notification away and walked toward the check-in counter. I handed my passport to the gate agent. She smiled warmly, verifying my first-class ticket to Bali. As she tagged my luggage and handed me my boarding pass, I felt a profound lightness spread through my shoulders. The suffocating weight of being the convenient financial scapegoat was finally lifting. While waiting in the expedited security line, I received a scheduled encrypted message from Riley, my junior assistant. "Package successfully deployed." She had flawlessly executed her part of the operation. The plain white envelope, clearly labeled Bora Bora Honeymoon Fund, was now sitting exactly where Blake had demanded, on the designated gift table near the kitchen doors of the grand ballroom. Inside that envelope was the worthless voided check and the fake property deed. My deceptive compliance was now physically cemented at the venue. Blake and my parents would see that envelope, assume I had submitted to their extortion, and proceed with their arrogant celebration completely unguarded. I navigated through the sprawling concourse toward the International Departure Lounge. My flight was not scheduled to board for another 2 hours. I found a secluded seat overlooking the tarmac and ordered sparkling water. I checked the time. It was 11:45, 15 minutes until the automated banking algorithms executed Caldwell's emergency injunction. I opened my banking application and verified my personal firewall. My accounts were locked, my credit was frozen, and my identity was completely detached from the fraudulent mortgage my parents had forged. At exactly 11:55, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my father. I let it ring until it diverted to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Nora, where are you? The wedding planner just said she has not seen you arrive at the venue yet. Drop the check off and stay out of sight." He was calling to ensure his extortion was proceeding exactly on schedule. I took a sip of my sparkling water. The digital clock on my phone ticked forward. 11:58, 11:59, noon. The moment struck. Across the city, in the secure servers of a major federal banking institution, a highly sophisticated algorithm processed Caldwell's emergency fraud injunction. Lines of digital code executed instantly, isolating the fraudulent $200,000 home equity line of credit. The system automatically triggered a hard federal freeze on every single asset connected to Harrison and Caroline. Their checking accounts, their savings portfolios, their shared credit lines, all instantly locked down to mitigate the bank's liability. Right now, at the luxury hotel downtown, my parents were likely ordering another round of drinks. When the wedding planner attempted to run their credit card for the final massive reception balance, the terminal would flash a bright red decline code. They would try another card. Declined. They would try a debit transaction. Declined. The humiliation would escalate into a full-blown financial panic. They would be standing in their custom-tailored formal wear, suddenly realizing they had zero access to their wealth. I sat in the airport lounge, completely insulated from their impending panic. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I was a mirror reflecting their own malicious actions right back at them. They had chosen to steal from their daughter to fund a lie. They had constructed this massive, fragile house of cards entirely on their own. I was the wind. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, listening to the muffled roar of jet engines outside. The financial freeze was currently ripping through my parents' accounts, paralyzing their fabricated wealth. And the ultimate payload, the sleek black box containing the forensic audit of Blake's embezzlement, was securely in the hands of the executive courier service, silently ticking closer to its 7:30 detonation time. A soft chime echoed through the quiet lounge. The final boarding announcement for my long flight to Bali illuminated the bright digital display screens. I picked up my heavy carry-on bag and confidently walked toward the departure gate. I was not the pathetic, cancelled engagement mess they desperately sought to hide. I was a brilliant, successful woman who had successfully amputated a highly toxic infection from her life. I handed my printed first-class ticket to the smiling flight attendant, stepped onto the jet bridge, and walked directly toward my new absolute freedom. I slept for hours, a deep, unbroken sleep that completely eluded me during the frantic weeks of dealing with my own cancelled wedding. There were no nightmares about my ex-fiancé betraying me. There were no stress dreams about my mother criticizing my choices or my father demanding compliance. The ambient hum of the jet engines served as a white noise machine, masking the decades of verbal abuse I had endured. When I finally opened my eyes, the cabin was bathed in the soft blue ambient light of the overnight cruising altitude. A flight attendant quietly approached, offering a warm scented towel and a fresh menu. I accepted the towel, pressing it against my face and letting the steam wash away the last lingering traces of Chicago. I ordered a black coffee and a light breakfast, spreading my notes across the spacious fold-out table. Even though the operation was already in motion, my analytical mind continued to review the timeline. Right now, back in the city, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip. The ceremony would be concluding soon. My parents were likely trying to mask their mounting panic behind strained smiles. The declined credit card authorizations at the hotel front desk would have sparked the initial wave of terror. Harrison would be furiously calling his private banker, completely unable to reach a human being who could override a federal fraud injunction on a Saturday. Caroline would be desperately trying to avoid the wedding planner's increasingly urgent demands for the final catering payment. They were currently trapped in a luxurious cage of their own making. For my entire life, they had weaponized money to control me. They used financial support as a tool to manipulate my brother into becoming their perfect proxy. Now that very same weapon had been completely neutralized. They had no liquidity, no leverage, and absolutely no power. I looked out the window at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean glittering under the sun. The sheer distance between me and their toxicity felt incredibly liberating. I was no longer Nora, the disappointing daughter. I was no longer the convenient backup plan or the quiet sister meant to blend into the gray background. I was the architect of my own absolute freedom. The funds paying for this premium flight, the luxury villa waiting for me in Bali, and the secure legal representation protecting my assets were all generated by my own intellect. I had not needed a golden child status or a wealthy spouse to achieve my stability. I built my fortress brick by brick, utilizing the exact same financial acumen my family had always dismissed as boring and irrelevant. As I sipped my coffee, my thoughts shifted to Blake. He was likely standing at the altar exchanging vows with Jada. He would be wearing his expensive tuxedo, flashing his charismatic smile, and playing the role of the triumphant groom. He believed he had successfully crossed the finish line. He assumed the forged lake house mortgage had bought him enough time to secure Jada's generational wealth. The sheer arrogance required to stand before a billionaire patriarch and pledge your life to his daughter while actively draining his corporate escrow accounts was staggering. Blake lacked any fundamental moral compass. He operated purely on predatory instinct. But predatory instinct is always blind to systemic risk. Blake only saw the immediate prize. He never looked down to check the structural integrity of the bridge he was running across. I had examined that bridge. I had mapped every fractured support beam and every rotting plank. I knew exactly when it was going to snap. I felt a brief wave of anticipation thinking about Jada. We had never shared a warm relationship, but my forensic audit was the ultimate act of silent sisterhood. By exposing the Cayman Island loans, I was acting as her unacknowledged shield. She was an ambitious, intelligent woman who had been completely blinded by a sociopathic narcissist. When her father opened that sleek black box at the reception, she would experience a world-shattering shock. It would be painful, embarrassing, and chaotic, but it would be clean. She would avoid the slow, suffocating destruction of a marriage built on federal wire fraud. I had handed her the scalpel required to cut the infection out before it spread to her own financial identity. The flight attendant returned with a fresh plate of seasonal fruit and a secondary cappuccino. I thanked her and opened a digital book on my tablet, intentionally disconnecting from the timeline playing out on the other side of the world. The beauty of a perfectly designed system is that it requires absolutely zero manual intervention once it is initiated. Caldwell had filed the injunction. The federal banking algorithms had frozen the accounts. The bonded executive courier was currently navigating the streets of downtown Chicago holding the detonator. I had successfully completely outsourced my vengeance to the most reliable entities on the planet: mathematics and the law. I spent the next several hours indulging in the unparalleled luxury of total detachment. I watched a movie, I read a few chapters, and I simply enjoyed the physical sensation of moving forward. For 33 years, I had been tethered to a family dynamic that demanded my constant submission. I had contorted my personality, suppressed my ambitions, and silenced my objections to maintain a fraudulent peace. The gray dress Blake demanded I wear was the ultimate metaphor for my role in their lives. They wanted me colorless, silent, and easily discarded. But they failed to realize that the people who sit quietly in the background are usually the ones observing everything. The quiet ones see the hidden transactions, they hear the hushed conversations, and they understand the true motivations driving the loud, arrogant performances taking place on the main stage. I had spent a lifetime gathering data. This weekend I was finally publishing the final report. As the flight mapping display indicated we were crossing over the final stretch of the ocean nearing the Indonesian archipelago, I felt a profound sense of closure. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of Chicago was entirely gone. The toxic expectations, the relentless comparisons, the extortion and the lies were all left thousands of miles behind me. I was flying toward a destination I had chosen for myself, funded by my own merit. I closed my tablet and stretched my legs, taking a deep breath of the filtered cabin air. The operation was out of my hands now. The pieces were falling exactly where they were engineered to fall. I closed my eyes again, letting the rhythmic hum of the aircraft carry me toward my new life. Timestamp: 1915, Central Standard Time. The Vanguard secure logistics operative arrives at the perimeter of the luxury downtown hotel. I sat in my first-class seat, staring at the encrypted messaging app on my phone. The in-flight internet allowed me to receive real-time updates from across the globe. According to the wedding itinerary Caroline had so proudly circulated, dinner service was concluding right at this moment. Waitstaff were clearing the final plates of filet mignon and truffle risotto. Harrison and Caroline were likely sweating through their designer clothes as their credit cards continued to decline at the management office. Blake was sitting at the head table, oblivious to his parents' financial hostage situation, holding Jada's hand and preparing for his ultimate victory lap. Timestamp: 1922, Central Standard Time. Operative has bypassed exterior event security. The message glowed on my screen. Vanguard was executing the insertion flawlessly. I pictured the operative, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, stepping into the grand foyer. He carried the heavy black gift box with the careful precision of a man transporting a live explosive. The private security detail hired by Jada's billionaire father would have moved to intercept him. But the operative simply presented the federal compliance mandate. a document requiring the immediate signature of the patriarch under penalty of regulatory default. Security did not argue. You do not block federal paperwork from a man whose real estate empire depends on strict regulatory compliance. Timestamp: 1928, Central Standard Time. Operative entering the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. Inside the room was a masterpiece of stolen money. Massive cascading floral arrangements hung from the vaulted ceilings. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the 400 elite guests. Blake was likely leaning back in his chair, adjusting his expensive imported tie, completely unaware that his executioner had just walked into the room. The operative moved silently through the maze of silk-draped tables, moving with military precision directly toward the VIP section at the front of the room. Timestamp: 1930, Central Standard Time. Package delivered. Signature acquired. Operative exiting the venue. I let out a long, slow breath. The payload was officially dropped. Right at this very second, Jada's father was holding the sleek black box. He had built a multi-billion-dollar trust from scratch and possessed a razor-sharp analytical mind. I knew exactly how this sequence would unfold because I designed the evidence specifically for his eyes. He opened the box, assuming it was a high-end corporate gift from a wealthy colleague or a rare vintage spirit to celebrate the occasion. Instead, he pulled out the heavy leather-bound portfolio. He saw the strict forensic formatting. The cover letter addressed directly to him caught his attention immediately. He read the first paragraph introducing my credentials and explicitly warning him of the catastrophic liability threatening his empire. The smile on his face vanished entirely, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a corporate titan who just realized his fortress had been breached. He flipped the heavy pages to Exhibit B, the paper trail of Blake's embezzlement. The phantom invoices from Apex Consulting Group printed side by side with the internal escrow disbursement logs from his own company. Jada's father did not need an interpreter to understand the data. He recognized the account numbers. He recognized the authorized signature blocks. He saw the highlighted routing numbers detailing how his future son-in-law had been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from his company right under his nose. He saw the internet protocol addresses proving Blake had authorized these fraudulent transfers while sitting inside the corporate headquarters. Then he turned the page to Exhibit C, the offshore loans in the Cayman Islands. He saw the unassailable proof that Blake had stolen Jada's social security number to secure highly toxic, unregulated debt. He read the timestamps proving Jada was at a charity luncheon while her identity was being weaponized for wire fraud. The air in the grand ballroom shifted. Guests sitting near the head table noticed the drastic change in the patriarch's demeanor. The ambient chatter died down as unease spread. Jada, sitting beside Blake, leaned over to ask her father what was wrong. He did not answer her. He simply closed the leather-bound portfolio, the heavy thud cutting through the soft background music of the string quartet. Blake, noticing the sudden silence, turned his attention to his new father-in-law. He likely offered a charismatic smile, asking if everything was all right. But the man staring back at him was no longer the welcoming billionaire, ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. He was a predator looking at a parasite. Jada's father stood up from his chair. He did not raise his voice. He did not cause a theatrical screaming match. Men of his caliber do not throw tantrums. They execute tactical eliminations. He signaled silently to the head of his private security detail standing near the perimeter. Two large men in dark suits immediately began moving toward the head table. Jada's father leaned down and placed the portfolio directly in front of his daughter, opening it to the page displaying her forged signature on the Cayman Island loan applications. He pointed to the documentation and then looked dead at Blake. Jada's eyes widened as she recognized her own stolen identity plastered across predatory offshore banknotes. At the exact same moment across the ballroom, the venue manager finally located Harrison and Caroline. The manager approached their table looking deeply uncomfortable. He quietly informed them that every credit card on file had been hard declined by federal banking authorities, and the police would be called if the massive balance was not immediately settled. My parents, completely stripped of their stolen equity and frozen out of their accounts, stared at the manager in absolute terror. The walls were caving in from every possible direction simultaneously. Blake realized his embezzlement had been discovered just as Harrison and Caroline realized their bank fraud had triggered a federal freeze. The beautiful, carefully curated illusion of wealth and elite status was instantly vaporized. The lavish dinner sat half-eaten as the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, watching the spectacular destruction of the golden child and his complicit enablers. I locked my phone and looked out the airplane window, perfectly satisfied. I listened to the desperate sound of my brother hyperventilating through the phone speaker. He was practically choking on his own panic. They locked the ballroom doors, Nora. Jada's father signaled his security detail, and they literally dragged me away from the head table. I was supposed to give my speech. Instead, I was shoved into a service elevator and thrown into the hotel manager's back office. His voice cracked, breaking under the sheer weight of his immediate reality. He had his corporate lawyers on speed dial. They showed up before the cake was even cut. They shoved your forensic audit in my face and demanded I explain the offshore Cayman accounts. Jada did not even look at me. She stood there in her custom gown and watched her father strip me of my executive credentials. They confiscated my company phone. They took my corporate credit cards. And then the federal agents arrived. I leaned my head against the cool leather seat of my private transfer vehicle, watching the lush green palm trees of Bali blur past my window. The contrast between my tropical sanctuary and his spectacular metropolitan destruction was absolute poetry. Blake was not finished. The voicemail continued, his tone shifting from aggressive rage to pathetic begging. You have to call them, Nora. You have to tell the federal investigators that you authorized those transfers. Tell them the Lake House mortgage was a mutual decision. My creditors are blowing up my secondary phone because the shadow loans just defaulted. If Jada's family presses charges, I am looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The wedding envelope you left on the gift table. I ripped it open, hoping to use the $25,000 to negotiate bail. I saw the voided check, Nora. I saw the fake deed. You set me up. You planned this entire execution. The recording ended with a sharp click. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I simply tapped the screen and saved the audio file to my secure evidence folder. His frantic admission of the offshore loans and the fraudulent mortgage was the final piece of digital concrete I needed to seal his federal indictment. He had just confessed to everything on a recorded line. I swiped to the next voicemail. This one was left an hour after Blake's initial meltdown. The caller ID displayed an unknown local Chicago number, but the voice belonged to a man used to giving orders and having them instantly obeyed. It was Jada's father. Nora, this is Jada's father. His voice was deep, resonating with a terrifying calm. My security team intercepted your courier at exactly 7:30. I have spent the last 2 hours having my internal compliance directors verify the data you provided. Your forensic audit was flawless. We have isolated the compromised escrow accounts and initiated lockdown protocols on the offshore liabilities your brother attempted to attach to my daughter. There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. You possess a ruthless analytical mind, Nora. You identified a massive systemic vulnerability in my organization, and you provided the exact legal scalpel required to excise the tumor before it became fatal. The federal authorities have taken your brother into custody. I have dispatched my personal legal team to ensure he is denied bail. My family owes you a significant debt of gratitude. Enjoy your vacation. We will handle the garbage disposal here in Chicago. I deleted the voicemail immediately. A billionaire patriarch did not need me holding on to his audio messages. His swift, merciless action was exactly what I had anticipated. I had handed a corporate titan the blueprints to his own impending destruction and pointed directly at the architect. Blake never stood a chance against a man who built skyscrapers and destroyed rivals for breakfast. The private transfer vehicle pulled up to the gated entrance of my luxury oceanfront villa. The driver opened my door, and a warm, tropical breeze washed over me. I stepped out onto the pristine white stone driveway, breathing in the scent of sea salt and blooming flowers. I tipped the driver generously, and walked through the carved wooden doors of my new sanctuary. I dropped my suitcase in the expansive living room and sank onto the plush white sofa. My phone was still displaying a massive wall of notifications. I had dealt with Blake and the billionaire. Now it was time to assess the collateral damage I had inflicted upon the enablers. I scrolled down to the third voicemail. It was from Caroline, my mother, the woman who had proudly commanded me to wear a cheap gray dress and hide in a corner so I would not embarrass her. I pressed play. The contrast between her previous arrogant commands and her current state of absolute devastation was staggering. She was not demanding compliance anymore. She was completely unhinged, weeping with the panicked intensity of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality burn to the ground. "Nora, pick up the phone right now." Caroline shrieked through the speaker, the sound of chaotic background noise confirming she was still at the hotel venue. "The bank declined all our cards. They declined your father's corporate platinum account. The hotel manager pulled us out of the reception hall and told us our accounts have a federal fraud lock. They are threatening to call the police for theft of services because we cannot pay the final catering bill." I listened to her hyperventilate, her perfectly curated high society accent dissolving into raw panic. And Blake, Nora, they arrested Blake. Men in windbreakers walked right into the ballroom and took him away in handcuffs. Jada's family left us here. They walked out and left us with a $300,000 bill we cannot pay. We are ruined, Nora. Our reputation is completely destroyed. Everyone saw it. The entire country club board was sitting at table 4. How could you do this to us? We are your family. I paused the recording. I looked out through the open sliding glass doors at my private infinity pool, merging seamlessly with the horizon of the Indian Ocean. I took a long, deliberate breath. They were my family, and that was precisely why I had to execute them financially. They had used that word as a weapon to extort my assets and diminish my worth. They had traded my security for their social climbing. I resumed the audio. Harrison snatched the phone from Caroline. His voice was shaking, stripped of all its former arrogant authority. "Nora, whatever you did to the bank accounts, you need to reverse it immediately. The state licensing board suspended Thomas an hour ago. He says you filed a federal forgery complaint. You have to retract it. You have to tell them you signed that mortgage document. If you do not retract the complaint, Thomas goes to prison, and I go with him for conspiracy." He paused desperately, trying to regain his dominant footing. "We can sell the lake house legitimately. We can pay you back. Just call your lawyer and stop the injunction. Please, Nora. You have made your point. You won." I stopped the playback. The desperation in his voice was absolute music to my ears. He was bargaining with a ghost. The federal machine was already moving at full speed, and there was absolutely no abort code. I had engineered this specifically so that once the dominoes began falling, no amount of begging, crying, or empty promises could halt the momentum. They were trapped in the exact extortion scheme they had designed for me. I placed my phone on the sleek glass coffee table. The fallout was proceeding perfectly on schedule. The cancerous tumor had been completely excised. I stood up, walked out onto the sun-drenched terrace, and looked out at the vast, endless ocean. The next voicemail was from my mother. She wasn't commanding anymore. She was sobbing hysterically. "Nora, please pick up. The bank froze all our accounts. The police came to the house about the forged signatures. We don't have access to a single cent, and the caterers are threatening to sue us for unpaid bills. Why would you do this to your own family?" They had bet everything on the illusion of wealth using my name as collateral. Now stripped of their stolen funds and exposed before the absolute highest echelon of Chicago society, they had absolutely nothing. I deleted the voicemail. I did not need to hear Caroline weep over the collapse of her carefully curated country club reputation. She willingly forged my signature, treating me as a disposable asset. That she still manipulated me with the word family proved she learned absolutely nothing. I opened my secure banking application, checking the federal freeze. Caldwell executed the maneuver with lethal precision. Harrison and Caroline were experiencing the brutal reality of a hard federal lock. When a bank suspects mortgage fraud involving a licensed notary and illicit wire transfers, they initiate an immediate sweeping lockdown of every linked financial instrument. Harrison undoubtedly tried accessing his primary checking account to pay the screaming hotel manager in the grand ballroom. Denied. He pivoted to his emergency credit lines. Denied. He probably tried liquidating a portion of his retirement portfolio online right there in the lobby. Access permanently revoked. Without liquidity, they were hostages to the elite vendors they hired to impress Jada's billionaire father. Luxury wedding caterers in downtown Chicago do not extend grace periods. When a $300,000 bill bounces, they immediately call legal counsel. My parents were physically escorted out of the hotel by private security. Their designer clothes and fake smiles could not save them from the profound indignity of being treated like common thieves in front of the exact people they were trying to impress. Then came the police. Caldwell had forwarded my sworn affidavit and digital proof of the forged notary stamp directly to the state prosecutor's office. Forging a signature on a $200,000 real estate loan is a severe felony in Illinois. Doing it in conspiracy with a licensed notary escalates the charges significantly. Detectives arrived at their pristine suburban home with a search warrant seizing computers, financial records, and mobile phones. Harrison always prided himself on his impeccable neighborhood image, cultivating the persona of a successful, wealthy patriarch. I pictured the flashing red and blue police lights reflecting off his manicured lawn for all the neighbors to see. The sheer mortification of being interrogated in his own living room while his assets were frozen must have been agonizing. He sacrificed his only daughter to fund a lie, and the lie finally collapsed right on top of him. My phone vibrated again. A text message from Thomas Gregory, the corrupt notary. "Nora, please, Harrison said you filed a complaint. I will lose my license and my pension. I only stamped the paper because your father swore you agreed to the loan, but we're too busy to come in person. Please withdraw the complaint. I have a family." I stared at the message. Thomas had known my family for 15 years, knowing the strict legal requirements of a dual signature trust. He chose breaking the law to appease his golfing buddy. In the financial sector, compliance is the only shield against chaos. He discarded that shield and now begged for mercy. I blocked his number immediately. I was not a judge or a priest. I was an auditor, and my only loyalty was to the ledger. The financial ruin of my parents was mathematically absolute. Because they leveraged their own suburban home as collateral for Blake's shadow loans in Delaware, their primary residence was now highly toxic. The moment those offshore shadow lenders realized Blake faced federal indictment, they would move to seize the collateral. My parents would lose the house. Without access to frozen accounts, they could not hire a premium defense attorney, relying on public defenders to navigate a complex federal fraud conspiracy case. They wanted to rub shoulders with billionaires. Now they would rub shoulders with bankruptcy lawyers and parole officers. I walked back into the spacious living area of my Bali villa. I sat down and opened my laptop, establishing a secure virtual private network connection to Chicago. I needed to verify the status of the lake house. The property my grandfather built with his own hands, the sanctuary they casually mortgaged to fund a honeymoon in Bora Bora. The county portal confirmed the federal lien was active. The property was locked in legal limbo, but my severance of liability held strong. I was entirely insulated from the $200,000 debt. Eventually, the bank would foreclose on my parents' portion of the trust. When it went to public auction, I planned to use my clean capital to buy their half for pennies on the dollar, reclaiming my grandfather's legacy completely free of their toxic ownership. My phone screen lit up with an email from Caldwell. The subject line read, "Status Update." I clicked it open. Nora, the state prosecutor's office, has officially opened an active investigation into Harrison and Caroline for bank fraud and conspiracy. Thomas Gregory is suspended pending a formal hearing. The hotel venue is pursuing civil litigation against your parents for breach of contract. Blake is denied bail due to flight risk and the sheer scale of the embezzlement. The billionaire patriarch's legal team is dismantling his shell companies. You are completely cleared of all liability. Enjoy your vacation, I replied with 2 words. Invoice me. I closed the laptop. The absolute silence of the villa was a stark contrast to the sirens and shouting echoing through my parents' lives in Chicago. I executed a flawless financial operation. I had not yelled or begged for their love. I simply held up a mirror to their greed and let the legal system shatter it. The illusion of the perfect golden family was dead. They spent decades tearing me down, calling me a failure, and demanding my absolute submission. They thought my quiet nature was a sign of weakness, never understanding that silence is the primary tool of an investigator. I analyzed and calculated the exact coordinates of their destruction. They had no money. They had nothing left but the crushing weight of their own choices. Among the chaos of my glowing phone screen, there was one calm text message waiting for my attention. It stood out completely from the panicked, unhinged voicemails left by my mother and the frantic, hyperventilating missed calls from my brother. The notification simply displayed a Chicago area code I recognized from my previous background research into the wedding vendors. I tapped the screen and opened the thread. It was from Jada. I sat back against the pristine white cushions of my villa sofa, listening to the distant sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. I had fully expected Jada to send a barrage of threats or perhaps file a civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. After all, I had effectively deployed a financial explosive device right in the middle of her multi-million-dollar wedding reception. For a woman raised in a fiercely proud billionaire family, public humiliation was the ultimate offense. I braced myself for a vitriolic attack as my eyes scanned the first few lines of her long block of text. When my father first showed me your files, I wanted to find you and kill you for ruining my wedding day, Jada wrote. Her opening sentence was entirely valid. She had spent the last year meticulously planning the social event of the decade. She had worn a custom designer gown and stood before 400 of the most elite influential figures in the Midwestern financial sector. To have her father suddenly halt the festivities, signal his security detail, and present a forensic audit exposing her groom as a common thief must have felt like a physical blow. The absolute shock and immediate public disgrace would have been completely overwhelming for anyone else. But Jada was not just a wealthy socialite. She was a highly educated executive board member of a massive real estate investment trust. She possessed the same ruthless analytical pedigree as her father. The message continued highlighting her rapid shift from emotional devastation to calculated corporate defense. But then our lawyers verified everything within an hour, she typed. My father had his crisis management team intercept the banking data you provided immediately. They ran a parallel trace on the escrow accounts, while Blake was locked in the manager's office under heavy guard. They pulled the highly encrypted offshore loan applications from the shadow lenders in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. They confirmed the digital signatures utilizing their own independent cybersecurity experts. They matched the Internet protocol addresses exactly as you mapped them out in your executive summary. They proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Blake was setting me up for federal wire fraud. I read the words carefully, absorbing the sheer efficiency of her father's corporate machine. A normal family might have cried or demanded a tearful explanation from the groom. A billionaire real estate tycoon simply unleashed a team of ruthless attorneys to verify the data and immediately neutralize the threat. They had cross-referenced my entire black box portfolio before the catering staff even finished clearing the main dinner plates. My family was about to lose tens of millions of dollars. Jada wrote, her tone shifting into a cold, hard realization of the catastrophic risk she had blindly walked into. If those offshore loans had defaulted, my personal assets would have been seized entirely. My father's company would have been dragged into a massive federal money laundering investigation. We would have faced congressional subpoenas and aggressive regulatory audits that could have completely dismantled our empire. We trusted him. We welcomed him into our inner circle, and he was actively digging a financial grave for my entire family. I took a sip of my iced water, feeling a profound sense of validation. I had not just saved myself from paying a fraudulent $200,000 mortgage. I had prevented the total financial contamination of an innocent family. Jada and her father had been completely targeted because of their immense wealth and their trusting nature. Blake had viewed their impeccable reputation as a convenient shield for his degenerate gambling addiction. Your family is a collection of disgusting parasites, Jada stated with absolute surgical precision. They sat at our tables eating our premium food and drinking our imported champagne while actively conspiring to use my wealth to cover their pathetic lies. Your parents smiled right in my face while secretly funding their luxury outfits with your stolen equity. They are weak, pathetic people who operate like leeches. I did not feel a single ounce of defensiveness reading her brutal assessment of Harrison and Caroline. Jada was entirely correct. They were parasites. They fed on the success of others and weaponized family guilt to extract resources from anyone they deemed useful for their own social climbing. But you are a surgeon, Jada continued. You saw the infection spreading, and you did not hesitate to cut it out. You bypassed the emotion and delivered the exact empirical data we needed to protect ourselves. You did not warn him. You did not try to negotiate or beg for your money back. You just gathered the evidence and executed a flawless tactical strike. You saved my life, Nora. I mean that literally. Thank you. I smiled, staring at the glowing screen. There was a deep, unspoken, mutual respect flowing through her words. We were two incredibly different women from entirely different worlds, but we both understood the absolute necessity of ruthlessness when dealing with a predator. We both recognized that toxic people cannot be reasoned with or rehabilitated. They must be systematically dismantled and permanently removed. Jada ended her message with a final postscript that made me laugh out loud in the quiet isolation of my tropical villa. PSI annulled it before the cake was even cut. My father had his corporate judges on standby. The marriage license was officially voided by 9 o'clock. Blake was handed over to the federal agents waiting in the lobby. He walked out in handcuffs and I went back into the ballroom to announce the open bar was extended until 2 in the morning. It was the ultimate power move. Jada had taken the worst humiliation of her life and instantly transformed it into a masterclass in crisis management. She did not hide in a bathroom crying over a ruined fairy tale. She voided the legal contract, threw the trash out to the curb, and commanded her guests to continue drinking. She was utterly formidable. I did not need to engage in a long back-and-forth conversation. We did not need to become friends or bond over our shared trauma regarding my brother. The transaction was complete. The data had been delivered, the threat had been neutralized, and the respective ledgers were entirely balanced. I tapped the reply box at the bottom of the screen. I kept my response perfectly aligned with the professional, cold nature of our brief interaction. I typed a quick, "You are welcome." I hit send, watching the small digital bubble appear on the screen, knowing it was the last communication I would ever have with anyone connected to my former life. Then I pressed the contact information icon at the top of the thread. I scrolled down to the bottom of the menu and hit the red delete button, permanently erasing Jada's number from my phone. I closed the messaging application completely, severing my final tie to the spectacular destruction occurring back in Chicago. The financial bloodbath was officially behind me, and the vast, untouched horizon of my new life was waiting right outside my door. They were blocked permanently. I placed my phone face down on the teakwood table and turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my laptop. The ocean breeze swept across the terrace, rustling the pages of the physical contract sitting beside my coffee cup. 6 months had passed since the catastrophic implosion of my family in that downtown Chicago ballroom. In the immediate aftermath, I had officially resigned from my corporate job. I took my substantial savings and the unblemished professional reputation I had built over a decade to launch Vanguard Forensic Audit Solutions. My independent consultancy specialized exclusively in dismantling high-level corporate fraud and tracking hidden offshore assets for elite clients. Ironically, my first major unrecorded endorsement came directly from Jada's billionaire father. While we never spoke again, the ruthless efficiency of the dossier I delivered to him spoke volumes in the ultra-wealthy financial circles of the Midwest. Whenever a prominent real estate investment trust or a private equity firm suspected internal bleeding, they suddenly knew exactly who to call. My client roster filled up within 3 weeks. I was currently billing triple my old corporate rate, and I managed my entire empire remotely from a stunning beachfront villa in Bali. The contrast between my current reality and the bleak existence of my former family was absolute. I kept a detached professional eye on their legal proceedings through public court dockets, treating their downfall as a fascinating case study in financial self-destruction. Blake was currently sitting in a federal holding facility in downtown Chicago, awaiting his official sentencing hearing. The charges against him were monumental. Federal prosecutors had indicted him on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. The sheer volume of the evidence I compiled made it completely impossible for him to secure a plea deal that did not involve substantial prison time. Furthermore, Jada's father's legal team had absolutely eviscerated him in civil court. They deployed a small army of vicious litigators to systematically strip him of every single asset he had ever fraudulently acquired. They seized his luxury cars, liquidated his high-end watch collection, and garnished any remaining legitimate capital he possessed to pay back the stolen escrow funds. Because Blake was entirely stripped of his stolen wealth, he could not afford a private defense attorney. The arrogant executive who once demanded I sit in a dark corner wearing a cheap gray dress was now relying on an overworked public defender to negotiate his federal prison sentence. The offshore shadow lenders from the Cayman Islands had aggressively written off his debt, but not before permanently destroying his credit and officially blacklisting him across global financial networks. He was looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. He would be 50 years old by the time he saw the outside of a cell, and his reputation in the financial sector was permanently radioactive. Harrison and Caroline suffered a similarly devastating fate. Their arrogant gamble had resulted in absolute financial ruin. The federal banking authorities immediately locked their accounts and initiated a massive investigation into the forged $200,000 home equity line of credit. Because they had actively conspired with a licensed notary to commit real estate fraud, their suburban colonial house was swiftly seized and pushed into foreclosure. The bank auctioned the property to recoup the fraudulent loan and the mounting legal fees. Their country club memberships were revoked. Their elite friends entirely abandoned them, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a family under federal indictment. Stripped of their home, their savings, and their fabricated social standing, they were forced to rent a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a decaying neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Harrison lost his executive position when his company discovered his involvement in the forgery scandal. No reputable firm would hire a man actively being investigated for bank fraud. He was currently working a minimum wage retail job just to keep the lights on. Caroline, who had spent her entire adult life judging others based on their designer labels, was now shopping at discount grocery stores and taking public transportation. Before I permanently blocked their numbers, they had spent months leaving me increasingly desperate voicemails. The messages shifted wildly from angry demands that I fix their situation to pathetic weeping pleas for financial support. Caroline begged me to send money for rent, claiming she was my mother, and I owed her basic human compassion. Harrison tried to guilt me by saying they were elderly and suffering. I never answered a single call. I simply archived the voicemails in a secure digital folder just in case they attempted to violate the strict legal severance Caldwell had established. As for the lake house, the beautiful wooden sanctuary my grandfather built, I executed a flawless financial maneuver. When the bank inevitably foreclosed on my parents' half of the trust due to the fraudulent mortgage, the property went to a quiet public auction. I utilized a clean proxy limited liability company funded by my new consulting revenue to purchase their foreclosed half for pennies on the dollar. I now owned the entire property, free and clear of their toxic influence. I planned to renovate the dock and spend my summers there, reading books, and drinking coffee perfectly insulated from the chaos I had left behind. The corrupt notary Thomas Gregory faced total professional destruction. The state licensing board permanently revoked his commission, and he was indicted alongside my parents for his role in the forgery. He chose to break the law to appease an arrogant friend, and the legal system crushed him without hesitation. I signed the final page of my new consulting contract, securing a massive retainer from an international shipping conglomerate. I closed my laptop and walked out toward the edge of my infinity pool. The tropical sun was beginning to set, casting brilliant shades of orange and purple across the sky. I had successfully completely rewritten my destiny. I looked out at the crystal-clear water of the Bali coastline, sipping a fresh cocktail. The tropical air was warm and deeply comforting, a stark contrast to the bitter, freezing winds of Chicago and the absolute emotional coldness of the people I once called my family. For 33 years, I had operated under the heavy, suffocating assumption that blood dictated loyalty. I had believed the societal lie that you must endlessly forgive the people who share your genetics, even when they view your existence as nothing more than a convenient resource to be exploited. I had allowed their constant criticism and their blatant favoritism to dictate my self-worth. But the moment I stopped looking at them through the lens of a desperate daughter and started analyzing them through the lens of a forensic accountant, everything changed. True security comes from within, not from external sources like family approval or blood obligation. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that family is our ultimate safety net. We are told that parents will always protect us and that siblings will always have our backs. But when that safety net is actually a tightly woven web of extortion, you have to find the courage to cut the ropes. Harrison and Caroline spent my entire life convincing me that I was inherently less valuable than my brother. They molded Blake into a golden idol, blindly feeding his massive ego until his arrogance metastasized into a federal crime. In their desperate sprint to secure elite social standing, they completely enabled his destruction. By constantly rescuing him and forcing me to subsidize his failures, they built the very trap that ultimately crushed them all. Rebuilding a life after a profound betrayal requires equal parts forgiveness and absolute boundaries. For a long time, I wrestled with the concept of forgiveness. People often confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. They assume that if you forgive someone, you must invite them back to your dinner table. That is a dangerous, catastrophic lie. I have forgiven my parents and my brother not by absolving them of their federal crimes, but by entirely releasing the anger that tied me to them. I no longer harbor burning resentment because resentment requires emotional energy, and I refuse to spend another ounce of my energy on people who forged my signature and attempted to drain my future. I forgive them by letting them go completely. I forgive them by allowing the strict, uncompromising consequences of their own actions to serve as their permanent teacher. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop protecting abusers from the consequences of their own actions. If I had simply paid the $200,000 fraudulent mortgage to keep the peace, my brother would have successfully married into a billionaire family while continuing to embezzle funds. He would have dragged Jada down into his dark financial abyss, and my parents would have continued to use me as their personal bailout fund every time his gambling debts resurfaced. By refusing to play my assigned role by utilizing my professional skills to expose the rotting foundation of their lies, I halted a massive cycle of abuse. I handed them over to the law, and in doing so, I secured my own absolute liberation. Financial independence is the ultimate boundary. Society often tells women that focusing on money is cold or calculating. They want us to be endlessly nurturing, constantly accommodating, and infinitely flexible with our boundaries. But let my story serve as a definitive warning. Financial literacy is armor. Understanding contracts, credit bureaus, and legal liability is not just for Wall Street executives. It is the tactical defense system that prevents predators from using your identity as a blank check. I built my career on finding the truth hidden in complex ledgers, and that exact same skill set is what allowed me to systematically dismantle my abusers without ever raising my voice. I did not need to scream or cry or beg for my dignity. I let the irrefutable evidence do all the talking. The greatest freedom comes from owning your narrative completely. For years, my family tried to write my story for me. They cast me as the difficult sister, the cancelled engagement mess, the bitter woman who just needed to support her brilliant older brother. They tried to edit my successes out of their public image while simultaneously stealing the equity I had worked so hard to build. But you hold the pen to your own life. When you refuse to accept the script handed to you by toxic people, you instantly reclaim your power. I rewrote my narrative from a target of extortion to a highly successful independent woman running a global consultancy from an oceanfront villa. I stopped seeking a seat at a table where I was not respected, and instead I built my own empire. We all face moments where the people we trust the most reveal their true motivations. It is incredibly painful to look at your own family and recognize them as a genuine threat to your survival. But acknowledging that truth is the first necessary step toward actual freedom. You do not owe your abusers your silence. You do not owe them your wealth, your peace of mind, or your future. You owe yourself the absolute best life you can possibly construct. Have you ever had to use your own success to dismantle the lies of the people who look down on you? Have you ever walked away from a toxic family dynamic and rebuilt your life entirely on your own terms? Share your experiences in the comments below. Let this community be a testament to the fact that you can survive betrayal and emerge stronger, sharper, and infinitely more successful. And remember, your story is still being written, and healing is always possible. The story of Nora powerfully illustrates a profound and often overlooked truth. Financial independence and literacy are the ultimate forms of armor against toxic family dynamics. Society frequently conditions us to view familial loyalty as an absolute obligation, demanding endless forgiveness, even when we are being actively exploited. We are taught to keep the peace and accept the roles assigned to us, even if those roles require us to diminish our own worth, to subsidize someone else's ego or fraudulent lifestyle. However, Nora's journey redefines what it means to establish a boundary. She demonstrates that true empowerment does not always require screaming matches, tearful confrontations, or begging for basic respect from people incapable of giving it. Instead, her weapon of choice was cold, hard data. By mastering her own financial destiny and understanding the intricate mechanics of legal and economic systems, she insulated herself from extortion. When her family attempted to weaponize her identity and steal her equity to fund a fabricated high society illusion, her meticulous financial preparation became her absolute shield. She outsourced her vengeance to mathematics and the law, proving that toxic people will inevitably orchestrate their own downfall if you simply remove your protective support and let the consequences play out. This narrative serves as a vital reminder that we are the sole architects of our own personal security. We do not owe our peace of mind, our hard-earned wealth, or our future to individuals who constantly treat our existence as a disposable resource. By bravely cutting the restrictive ropes of forced obligation, we finally make room to build an authentic life on our own terms, entirely free from manipulation. Take a moment today to review your boundaries, secure your financial independence, and share in the comments how you have reclaimed your power from those who underestimated you.